Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Man, y'all babysitters see the creepiest crap. Why y'all sending me stuff like this? Talking moths? Living dolls? Supernatural urban legends? I've never even babysat before, but now I'm afraid of it. Like I'm gonna wake up one night as someone's babysitter randomly, just so I can be stalked by a killer clown or something. Ugh, I thought babysitting sounded easy, but dang. Y'all have me drinking my third nitro cold brew during a morning shift. Welcome back, my friends, and prepare yourself for some allegedly true babysitter stories from the Black Freaking Lagoon. And hey, instead of a tip, would you be so kind as to follow Tales from the Break Room on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app, and leave us a rating or review too? Thank you. Also, send us your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit, or order my cryptid-themed trading card game at cryptidcardgame.com. These are Tales from the Break Room. The Marionettes, from Anonymous. I first met Davian and Mariella a month earlier, when they hired me as a babysitter for their daughter Irina. They lived in a pre-war apartment building on a quiet street, the kind where mature trees line the sidewalks, and the facade is ornate with aged stonework. Inside, their home was tastefully renovated, blending modern furnishings with old architectural touches, exposed beams, crown molding, and original hardwood floors. I remember feeling impressed by how well they'd preserved the character of the place. That particular evening, Davian and Mariella greeted me at the door with their usual warmth. Davian, slightly lanky with round spectacles, wore a casual blazer, and Mariella, elegant with her dark hair pinned back, offered me a gentle smile. They were heading to a gallery event and would be gone for several hours. We made small talk as they showed me the nursery where Irina, who was around 4, would be sleeping eventually. The child's room was decorated in soft pastels, an antique rocking chair in the corner, plush toys arranged neatly. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I noticed Mariella was wearing a subtle, nervous smile. She explained that Irina should be easy tonight, as she smoothed the edge of a quilt on the crib, reminding me of her routine. Dinner at 7, followed by a story or two, then bed at 8. Davian chimed in. "Help yourself to anything in the kitchen if you get hungry." He looked at his watch. "We shouldn't be too late." Irina was playing quietly with a picture book on the rug. She greeted me by name. She remembered me from past visits and seemed calm. I got the sense that she liked me well enough, and that would make the evening quite simple. After the parents left, I took Irina to the living room to keep her occupied until dinner. The atmosphere was pleasant. There was rain beginning to patter against the windows, setting a peaceful mood. The apartment was quite spacious, too. A long hallway led to the bedrooms, and at the far end, something caught my eye. There was a decorative folding screen against the wall. Behind it, I could just barely make out what looked like a doorknob. Odd, I thought, because I didn't remember a door being there last time. Maybe I just hadn't noticed. I pushed the thought aside and focused on Irina. She played with some wooden blocks and listened intently as I read her a short story before dinner. She was a well-behaved child. No fuss, no tantrums. Around 7, I reheated the prepared pasta dish Mariella had left in the fridge, and Irina ate quietly. By 8, she was yawning. I put her to bed without issue. She drifted off pretty easily, and I turned off the nursery light, leaving only a dim glow from a nightlight shaped like a little owl. With Irina asleep and the soft rain outside, I settled into the living room couch, flipping through channels on their TV. My eyes kept wandering to the hallway, to that spot where I thought I saw the hidden door. Curiosity got the better of me. Why would they conceal a door behind a folding screen like that? I got up, walking quietly down the hall, careful not to make too much noise. I didn't want to wake Irina. Sure enough, the folding screen, painted with a floral pattern, partially obscured a narrow door. It was small, more like a closet door, and lacked any obvious decoration. The knob looked old, brass with a bit of tarnish. I gently tested it. It was unlocked. Part of me said I shouldn't invade their privacy, but another part argued they never told me not to open any doors. Maybe it was a linen closet or just some storage space. I rationalized that if it was private, it would be locked, right? I slowly opened the door. Inside, there was a cramped alcove lit by a single overhead bulb that gave off a weak yellowish glow. The space smelled faintly musty, like old wood. Hanging on the walls were marionettes, at least a dozen of them. They hung from hooks and pegs, their strings neatly coiled. They were child-sized, dressed in old-fashioned outfits, miniature suits, frilly dresses, suspenders, and pinafores. Their faces were painted with a level of detail that sent a shiver through me, what with their glossy eyes, rosy cheeks, and delicate lashes. Each face held an expression that was almost, but not quite, smiling. My heart skipped. This was unexpected. I had never known them to collect dolls or anything like this. The marionettes looked antique, meticulously crafted. Something about their presence felt off. The combination of realism and the eerie silence of the little alcove unsettled me. I decided not to stay too long. I closed the door softly and returned to the living room. I tried to dismiss it all. Maybe it was a strange family heirloom collection, or something Davian and Mariella found in the building's old storage, deciding to keep. I told myself at the end of the day it didn't really matter. But as the minutes passed by, I felt weird. It was like I was being watched now. I glanced around on occasion, but there was no one there. Of course, we were alone. To calm down, I checked on Irina. She was asleep and breathing soundly. The nursery curtains, however, seemed to have shifted a bit. It looked like someone had brushed up against them. I assumed a draft from the slightly cracked window in the living room might have caused that movement. I shook off the nerves, returning to the couch, turning the TV volume down low. About half an hour later, a subtle tapping sound broke the stillness. It sounded like wood lightly knocking against wood. I muted the TV. The tapping persisted, faint but distinct. It seemed to be coming from the hallway. My mind immediately went to that alcove with the marionettes. Could it be loose floorboards? Maybe a branch tapping against an outside wall. As I approached the hallway, the tapping stopped. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. But I couldn't leave it alone. I had to go look. Opening the door again, I found the marionettes seemingly rearranged. Before, I was certain the one in a bright blue sailor suit had been facing the back wall. Now it faced outward, head tilted as if looking toward the door. Another in a pink dress had its arm raised slightly, whereas I recalled its arms had dangled straight down. The changes were subtle, but they were enough to turn my stomach. I felt another chill then. My hand was shaking as I closed the door firmly this time. I pressed my ear to the door's surface after, just to listen, but there was silence. I retreated, wanting to put as much distance as possible between me and that room. I checked the front door's lock too. It was still engaged. There was no sign of an intruder. Could Irina have gotten up and moved them? No, she was soundly asleep. Could Davian and Mariella have come back without me noticing? Unlikely. And the marionettes looked too heavy for Irina to even handle quietly. I paced the living room, feeling nervous. The rain outside was getting heavier. Every small sound now felt threatening. Was I imagining things? The apartment's old structure could cause shifts in doors. Maybe I was misremembering how the dolls were actually positioned. I wanted to believe that. Still, I couldn't shake the discomfort. the sense that those painted eyes were somehow aware. Soon, I heard another noise, a soft thump. This time it was coming from the direction of the nursery. I rushed inside, worried about Irina. She still lay in bed, undisturbed. I noticed, though, that one of her stuffed animals, a teddy bear, had fallen off the rocking chair and onto the rug. Perhaps that was the cause of the thump. But how had it fallen? The chair wasn't even near the bed. I picked it up, replaced it, and whispered a reassurance to the sleeping child. Returning to the living room, I tried to watch some more TV, forcing myself to focus on some mindless program. The tapping started once more, even fainter than before. My pulse was quickening. I told myself I would not go back to that alcove. It was too creepy. Let it be. I would just wait for the parents to come back and do nothing more. Time crawled. Each minute felt like an hour. Thunder now rumbled outside. I checked my phone. They said they would be back around midnight. It was now close to 11. In my restlessness, I dared a final trip to the hallway. There was something I needed to confirm. Placing my palm on the alcove door, I felt a slight vibration, as if something inside shifted. I flinched, stepping back. The bulb under the door's gap flickered or dimmed. I couldn't be sure which. I decided to ignore it. I picked up my backpack from near the entrance, sat on the couch again, and tried to calm myself by reading news on my phone. But my eyes kept flicking up to that hallway. There was another faint scratch. I rubbed my arms, feeling goosebumps. At last, just before midnight, keys jangled at the front door. I sprang up, relieved, and opened the door to see Davian and Mariella. They came in smiling, shaking off the rain from their coats. "Oh, how was Irina?" Mariella asked softly. "Perfectly fine," I answered. I tried not to sound too nervous, but I'm sure I was doing a poor job. "She's sleeping. Everything's quiet." "Except for that horrible alcove," I wanted to say. Davian must have sensed something. "Is everything all right?" He glanced around as if expecting to find a broken lamp or a spilled drink, typical babysitting stuff. I took a breath. If I had said nothing, I never would have known. But I did. I'm sorry, but this is gonna sound strange. That door over there, at the end of the hallway, behind the screen. I opened it. That room with the marionettes. Something seems off about it. I stopped, feeling ridiculous the moment the words came out. Mariella's brow furrowed. Behind the screen? She exchanged a look with Davian. Davian stepped into the hall. I followed a few steps behind. He reached the end, turned on a nearby sconce light, and pulled the screen aside. I couldn't breathe. There was no door there. Just a solid wall covered in patterned wallpaper. I stared in disbelief. Only moments ago I had seen a door right behind there. I had opened it and gone inside. I'd felt the knob under my hand, but now there was nothing but wall. Mariella joined us. "Are you feeling okay?" Her tone was gentle, concerned, as if she thought I might be sick. I know I saw something." I hesitated, but I decided not to push it. Their child was safe, unharmed. The parents obviously saw no door. Maybe something was off with the apartment. Some trick of the light. My imagination fueled by the strange old building and the storm outside. Yet I still remembered the smell of that musty alcove, the texture of the marionette's painted face. I looked at Davian and Mariella's sincere confusion and realized insisting would only make me sound unstable. Mariella placed a hand on my arm. "It's late, hon. You were here alone in the rain. Perhaps you fell asleep or got turned around. We've never had any door back there. just the old plaster walls. I nodded and forced a smile. I couldn't really argue. I got paid for my work, thanked them for the opportunity, and left. The moment I stepped into the hallway outside their apartment, I felt safer. The building's stairwell was dim but normal. No strange doors, no marionettes, no strange sounds. On the street, the rain had lessened to a drizzle. I walked home quickly, glancing over my shoulder now and then, hoping I wasn't being followed by a marionette. About a week after that, Davian and Mariella, surprisingly, asked me to babysit again. I didn't think they would after the insanity I'd been spewing, or at least to me that's what it sounded like at the time. Even so, I couldn't go back there. I simply lied and said that I was busy. I couldn't get this fear out of my head, that if I went back there, laid on their couch after the child was put down, and looked down the hallway, I'd see that door again. And I'd know one of two things. There's something wrong with that apartment, or I am insane. What I encountered through the baby monitor. From Gabby Rella. I was a 17-year-old high school girl, and I often babysat in my community for some extra cash. A pretty basic babysitting tale, really, until this night. I was hired by M and S to watch their toddler F. I'll use letters for the sake of anonymity. They lived in a comfortable or cozy-sized apartment. It wasn't very big, but I loved that it smelled like lavender. M and S were gracious, if a bit rushed. They were heading to some late-night gathering. If I recall correctly, it was some sort of late dinner with distant family members. Very late. They explained they likely wouldn't be back until after midnight. F, they said, was already asleep in her room and almost never woke during the night. So I would have an easy job. M told me to just keep a close ear out and everything should be okay. She pointed to a baby monitor sat on the kitchen counter. It looked like a small digital screen, slightly old-fashioned but functional. They told me if she made any noise that I would hear it from there. I could knock on the door and reassure her if I had to, but it's never been an issue before. I happily told them okay, and before leaving, they showed me the basics. The location of bottled water, the remote for the TV, and the lock on F's bedroom door. It wasn't unusual for parents to keep a child's room locked from the outside. A type of child-proofing measure, I guessed. S demonstrated that if I needed to get in, just turn the key hanging from a hook right next to the door. He explained the key was always there, and if for any reason it wasn't, to let them know. They gave me a cell phone number and headed out. After they left, I settled into the living room. The monitor, about the size of a small tablet, displayed a grainy black and white image of F's crib. I could make out her tiny form, bundled under a blanket. She was completely still. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the fridge. I turned on the TV at low volume, glancing occasionally at the monitor. Everything stayed calm for hours. Around 11:30, I heard a soft crackling through the monitor speaker. Static. I looked over and saw the image flicker slightly. F hadn't moved, but now the edges of the picture were distorted. Maybe the signal had weakened. I tapped the screen gently, but that didn't do anything. Then came a faint shuffle, like someone moving against fabric, like someone stepping lightly on carpet. Concerned, I moved closer to the monitor. The picture stabilized for a moment. F lay as before, unmoving. But something caught my eye in the far corner of the image. It was a shape, just at the edge of the camera's range, standing near the crib. My heart thumped. At first, I told myself it could be a piece of furniture, or a stuffed animal casting a shadow. But as the static wavered again, I saw the shape tilt its head slightly. It was tall, much taller than a toddler. Someone was in that room. I jumped up and hurried to F's door. I tried the handle, but it was locked. Right, the key, I thought. I reached for the hook on the wall, but it was empty. My stomach felt knotted. The parents had told me the key would always be there. Had I dropped it? Did I ever touch it? I scrambled, checking the nearby floor, but it was nowhere in sight. On the monitor's tiny screen, the figure took a step closer to the crib. I could see it more clearly now, a lean silhouette bending slightly over the rails. Through the grainy footage, I could not make out any defining features, just a dark outline against the dim nursery light. F still didn't stir. The silence made it worse, pressing in on me. I could feel my palms sweating as I rattled the doorknob. I then tried to call the parents, M and S, but their phone went straight to voicemail. Panic rose in my throat. I pressed my ear to the door. Not a sound. Back at the monitor, the figure moved in such a way it almost looked like it was gliding. When it turned its head, I had the unsettling impression it somehow knew I was watching it. Its posture changed, and it seemed to face the camera directly. It was staring at me through the lens, knowing that someone was watching and could not get in. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, out of instinct rather than reason, and tried once more to force the door, but nothing. The figure in the monitor reached a hand, an arm, down toward the crib. I saw movement, but no details. This was impossible. How did someone get inside? All the windows had been closed. There was no sound of a break-in. Suddenly, I heard a light click behind me. The door handle turned easily now. I stood there, knife in hand, uncertain whether to open it. The monitor image showed the figure still just by the crib. If I went in, it would be right there, and I would confront it. But what would I really be facing? My heart felt as if it was going to give out. I forced myself to twist the knob and push the door inward. The nursery was dimly lit by a small lamp in the corner. The crib was there, F asleep as promised, her little chest rising and falling calmly. But there was no one else. Just a rocking chair, a bookshelf with picture books, and a pile of soft toys. The shape I'd seen on the monitor had vanished. I rushed to check every corner. Under the crib, behind the chair, even in the closet. Nothing. F didn't wake, just sighed softly and turned her head. I stood in the center of the room, confused and terrified. The silence felt extremely heavy. Finally, I backed out of the nursery, leaving the door ajar, and returned to the living room. The knife I was holding in my hand still felt ridiculous now, but I kept it close. The monitor displayed only static. No image. I tried turning it off and on again, but it wouldn't show the nursery anymore. I had no idea how the intruder had gotten in, or how they got out. The front door and windows were all still locked. I paced around, checking every room. Everything looked normal. Shortly after midnight, M and S finally came home. You might think this is the part of the story where I tell you that I didn't say anything out of fear of sounding crazy. Nope. I told them exactly what I saw in that room, or rather, through the baby monitor. They're the parents of that poor baby. They deserved to know the full truth. They looked at me, eyebrows raised, then explained to me that sometimes the old monitor might have a glitch or artifact here and there, and it was probably nothing. I wanted to believe them, but what I saw was no glitch or artifact. It was a very clear and real figure of someone or something in F's room. I tried to tell them that, but they didn't believe me. I couldn't blame them for that either. I mean, they couldn't find any trace of a break-in in the house. No evidence that anyone else had been in there but me and F. Frazzled and a bit creeped out, I was given my payment and I left. I was happy that F was okay, and I prayed for the future safety of F. Hopefully, whatever presence I saw in that room was a one-time thing. To this day, I can completely recall the look of that silent figure, the way it turned its head toward the camera, and the sound of the door unlocking on its own. I know what I saw, and the quiet horror of that night still freaks me out. He had to feed it. From Triple Z. This was a bizarre and unsettling experience I had while babysitting about 10 years ago. I was at some family friend's house, and I would be babysitting their 7-year-old son, Rune. When I got there that night, he was flipping through a picture book, just lying on the rug. His mother greeted me, and before they left, they ran through a checklist of instructions. When to do what not to do, what definitely to do, and yada yada. There was one particular note I will mention here. They said that some of the older built-in cabinets should stay locked no matter what. Rune's father said they keep them that way for safety reasons. Before leaving, they reminded Rune to behave. Then they went off. When they were gone, I settled in, and Rune seemed easy enough to handle at first. He was polite and calm. After a while, we even played a board game together. He won easily, I let him, and he grinned shyly. Around 8 p.m., as night completely fell, Rune's demeanor seemed to change. He looked over his shoulder towards a particular hallway more than once. At first I ignored it, thinking maybe he expected his parents to return earlier than he thought. Eventually Rune stood up, went through the hallway and into the kitchen. Curious and wanting to make sure he would be okay, I followed him. In the kitchen, I found him stroking this old antique cabinet, one of the built-in ones that his father had warned me to keep shut, for safety reasons. "Hey, what you doing?" I asked, about to give him a quick reminder to not open it. But then he said something really weird. "We have to feed it tonight," he said very quietly. I wasn't sure if I heard him right at first. Feed it? I frowned and asked, "Excuse me? Feed what?" Rune didn't answer my question right away. He looked at me, eyes wide, as if hoping I already understood. "We have to give it something. Bread or something small. It's hungry again." Yeah, that's weird. "Rune," I said gently, "I don't know what you're talking about. Your parents didn't mention anything about feeding a pet. Is this a game you play? Pretend?" He shook his head. He seemed very serious, even alarmed, as if he was very stressed out about this. "It's not a game. Last time we didn't feed it, there was scratching all night long. Mommy and Daddy said we must always give it something. They usually do it before they leave. I think they forgot." His voice was very obviously trembling. I told him, "I'm sure it's just a story, Rune. Maybe you even dreamed this." He got close to the cabinet. "No, I swear I saw tears on his face then. Please, we have to feed it. Just a little bread, maybe even give it a toy, to keep it calm." I paused. I was beyond uncomfortable. This child was creeping me the freak out. Why was he so clearly scared? Kids are famous for their bad acting, and this kid, if he was pretending with me, was the best actor I've ever seen. Maybe I should take this kid seriously, or call up Steven Spielberg. I knelt down next to him. "Listen, I can't open that cabinet. Your parents told me not to. And we should listen to what they say." His lower lip was quivering now. He darted to a different cabinet, one of the newer ones that was installed much later after the house was built. He opened it, grabbed a loaf of bread, reached in to grab a slice, and ran back over. "Can we at least try?" he whispered. I wasn't sure about that. "Rune," I looked around. "I know his parents told us not to open these cabinets, But how would they know? If it would make this kid stop freaking me the heck out, maybe it was worth breaking a little rule, especially one they would never know about. All right, don't tell your parents. I don't see a key or anything to it. I pointed to the keyhole. He pulled at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Locked. Oh no, he said. The way he said those words gave me goosebumps. Well, where do you guys keep the key? Mom and Dad don't tell me. Crap, I thought. I was gonna have to put up with this paranoia all night. I tried to get him to relax, putting the slice of bread back up, and we went into the living room. But every minute that passed, he seemed more and more stressed out. At about 9 o'clock, the lights in the house flickered just once. Could have been a power surge or anything like that, but it caused Rune to run over to me and clutch my arm. That's it. It's waking up. I wanted to sigh and roll my eyes, but the way he acted, man, this was the scariest kid I'd ever met. Not even in a direct way, like a black-eyed kid or anything like that, but he was seriously scared of something, and I was starting to worry myself. It could be old wiring or any number of reasons. Lights flicker from time to time. Nothing to worry about. He looked up at me with wide, watery eyes. Come on, we gotta get you ready for bed. Maybe his routine would help him calm down. He followed me hesitantly to his bedroom. I put him into some pajamas, and as I did, he started to plead with me. We have to try again, he said. If it's locked, maybe we can slip a little bit of something through the cracks. I was about to tuck him in by then, but I decided to humor him one last time. Humoring him and having him calm down would really help my situation too. You think I wanted to be alone now in a very creepy place, all thanks to a kid's acting? Maybe if I pretended to feed this imaginary thing, he would relax. Returning to the kitchen, I took the piece of bread Rune had grabbed before, ripped a few small pieces off, and shoved it into the cabinet through the small cracks in the door. What didn't fit, I left in front of the cabinet, just in case. He had mentioned leaving a toy before, so I grabbed one of Rune's toy cars and placed it there. I felt silly, but if it helped Rune, it helped me. I went back to tuck him in the rest of the way, letting him know what I did, and he seemed to feel a bit better about it. Several minutes later, as I was in the living room, I heard something. There was a faint scraping noise coming from the kitchen. My rational mind told me it was pipes or a branch outside, but this was an interior wall. No windows, no trees. The scraping came again, slightly louder, like something clawing at wood. After Rune's tall tale, I was starting to feel uncomfortable again. I grabbed my phone and checked the time, trying to convince myself it was just old building or furniture noises. But then the lights dimmed again, just for a second. I stood up and took a very slow step towards the kitchen. As I made it through the archway, the scraping sound stopped. I looked down at the cabinet. The bread and toy were still there. I decided not to touch the cabinet. Instead, I returned to Rune's room. He was awake, his eyes large in the dim light of his nightlight. I heard it, he whispered. I nodded at him. It knows we tried. He then hid under his blanket. I went over and patted him. Go to sleep, buddy, I said, though I doubted either of us were going to sleep tonight. As I waited in the living room, every so often, I would hear a faint shuffle or a small thump coming from the kitchen, and I knew it was coming from that cabinet. And at one point, I swear I heard breathing. But at midnight, Rune's parents came back, and I was so dang happy. After they came in, got relaxed, asking how Rune had done, I asked the question I'd been wondering. Do you guys have a pet? Rune seemed very worried about feeding something in a locked cabinet in the kitchen. The two of them looked at each other. The dad said, "That old cabinet doesn't even open. It's got a keyhole, but whoever built it and left it there never left us a key. We're actually planning on renovating the place and removing it, along with all the old original cabinets." "Oh," I said. "Well, to be honest with you, I started to hear scratching and thumping sounds coming from that cabinet, and I think they freaked out Rune. They freaked me out." They explained the place was originally quite old. Could be rats. There were probably holes on the exterior walls outside. They weren't very obvious to the naked eye. That could be likely routes for rats. But I don't think that sounded like a rat. Whatever was making those noises sounded like it barely fit in that cabinet. I walked home that night, feeling afraid of the dark like I used to be a decade before. I never did figure out what was in that cabinet, and I did my best to stop thinking about it as soon as I possibly could. That was also the last night I ever saw Rune. I'm sure he's fine, I just never babysat for them again. In fact, I didn't babysit much more after that. What do you think it could be? If I had to guess, maybe Rune was pranking me. Maybe he really is an insanely good actor. Probably put some sort of big turtle or wild animal in there, right before I showed up, wanting to scare the living daylights out of me. And I'll tell you the truth, it worked. Have you ever been scared of moths? I have. From Giz X23. I first met Trina through my aunt, who swore up and down that I needed more clients and that Trina needed more help. Trina was raising her 2 kids alone, working double shifts some weeks, scrambling for a night off others. I'd started babysitting locally in Alabama, trying to earn a bit of money while building trust in my community. The trouble is, folks don't line up to hire a babysitter they barely know until they're in a pinch. My aunt's recommendation gave Trina the confidence to try me out. Over time, I'd watched her kids maybe 3 or 4 times. No drama, just quiet nights in a comfortable home. When I say home, I mean a newer model trailer that Trina owned outright on a modest piece of land. It wasn't the stereotypical cramped space either. This trailer had surprisingly roomy interiors, and even a detached garage out back. She kept it neat and tidy. The front steps led up to a small porch, and the living room opened up into a cozy kitchen. Down a short hallway were the kids' rooms, and a spare room Trina sometimes used for storage. Outside the property was dimly lit by a single yard lamp and a nearby street light just beyond the short driveway. It was a quiet part of Alabama, where crickets sang at night, and neighbors weren't too close but still close enough to feel safe. Trina had 2 children, who was 8 years old and shy, and her younger son, Evan, who was nearly 5 and still full of the curiosities and questions that preschoolers often have. I'd grown quite fond of both. Arya loved to read or look at old nature magazines, while Evan preferred building blocks and toy trucks. They weren't rowdy, and Trina swore by their fixed bedtime routine. That evening, Trina planned to go to a friend's place across town. She would be back around 11. She was dressed in jeans and a light sweater, and I could hear her keys jingling in her purse when she was checking for everything she needed. She said the kids already ate, so no need to worry about that for a while. Arya might stay up reading until 8:30 or 9 if she's quiet. Evan's already in pajamas, so just brush his teeth and tuck him in soon. She talked like a single mother would talk. You know, worried and overly concerned about leaving her kids for any amount of time. It's sweet, really, but I could tell she felt better knowing that I would be there. She mentioned offhand that Arya might want to show me something in the spare room. She's taken an interest in collecting some things, Trina said, not getting specific. Anyway, y'all have a good evening. Gotta go. With a wave and a quick goodbye to the kids, she stepped out into the Alabama dusk, climbed into her car, and left. I watched from the window as her taillights vanished down the quiet rural road, The place was pretty snug and calm. Evan was finishing a picture he'd started coloring. Arya was on the couch, sitting and leafing through a worn magazine about birds. Outside, I could hear the crickets singing. A quiet, peaceful night. Nothing unusual. After a bit of quiet play, I decided it was time to get Evan ready for bed. We brushed his teeth, and he mumbled some sleepy nonsense. I tucked him in with his favorite stuffed alligator. He drifted off without any fuss. That left me and Arya in the living room. She was sat by a dim lamp, using the light to study a page about moths and butterflies. She glanced up at one point, meeting my eyes, and said, "Can we go to the spare room? I really want to show you something." She seemed eager. "Sure, kiddo," I said, getting up. Together we walked down the hallway with its slightly creaky floor. The spare room door was half open. Inside, I noticed a side table with a paper lantern resting on it. Arya approached it slowly but excitedly. As I stepped closer, I realized the lantern contained several moths. Their wings flapped against the thin paper. I raised my eyebrows, surprised that the moths hadn't flown off. "Oh, you caught these?" I asked. "Yes," Arya said. "Near the porch light last week. I actually think they like it in there." She sounded pretty confident. But then she said, "They tell me things," and picked up a small stack of notes. I raised an eyebrow and looked at her carefully. The notes were just scraps of paper, each with little scribbled phrases. I read a few. "She's anxious about going. Someone lost an old photograph. He's unsure about tomorrow." The words were pretty vague, but still the topic was kind of weird. Was Arya pretending to be psychic, using these moths as a medium? A unique idea, to be sure. I managed a small smile. Moths telling secrets. That's creative. Are you making these stories up from things you hear around the house? She looked at me, dead in the eye. "They know about you, too," she said. I winced a little bit, thinking, what was that supposed to mean? She held up a different note. "She remembers the place under the tall oak." I coughed after a sudden inhale caused me to choke. If that was really about me, it was referring to a childhood memory of mine, one that I had never mentioned to anyone here. There was a place I used to sit and daydream behind my old family home, long before I knew Trina or her kids. There was no reason Arya would know about that, could know about that. But it was, I guess, just vague enough that maybe she had just guessed it. I smiled again, this time not really meaning it. "Maybe you're just very observant," I said. "Did you overhear me talking on the phone or see me text someone?" I was pulling at straws, really. Arya shrugged, as if my skepticism didn't matter to her. "They like when I write what I hear," she said simply. "But they choose whose secrets to share." Something about that really bothered me, because she made it sound like it was perfectly normal. "It's getting close to your bedtime," I said, truthfully. "Want to head back and maybe do a puzzle before you go to bed?" Arya agreed. We left the lantern and its fluttering inhabitants behind. Back in the warm light of the living room, with Evan snoozing in his room, the atmosphere felt normal again. Thank God. We worked on a jigsaw puzzle featuring a forest scene. Arya's weird excitement and intensity seemed to fade now. She was back to being a kid, a quiet kid, focused on what she liked. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, just the vivid and often strange imagination of a kid. As the hour approached for Arya's bedtime, she yawned and followed me through her nightly routine. She didn't even try to mention the lantern or the notes again. Once she was tucked in, I read a few pages from a library book she'd picked. She fell asleep easily, and after that, the trailer was quiet. I settled into an armchair by the window. I was wondering, if I went back in the spare room and looked at that lantern, what would I find? What did the other notes say? At the end, I just decided I should let sleeping dogs lie. After all, Trina would be back in a while, and I'd be on my way, leaving behind whatever odd secrets that lantern held. At least, that's what I told myself. I was really just coping. 20 minutes later, I was still sitting in that armchair, magazine in hand, reading the same paragraph over and over without absorbing a single word. My heartbeat hadn't quite returned to normal since discovering how close that note hit to my private memories. The trailer was feeling more and more quiet and claustrophobic. Eventually, I couldn't stand it. I set the magazine down and stood up. There was no leaving this alone. I needed another look, if only to convince myself it was just a coincidence. I climbed the short hallway again, mindful of every soft creak in the floor. Arya was asleep and I didn't want to wake her. I walked into the spare room. I nearly jumped at my reflection on a small mirror on the wall. I sighed, then looked at the lantern on the table. The moths seemed to stir a bit as I approached. The stack of notes Arya had shown me was still there, just a few loose slips. However, there was a scrap of paper half tucked under the lantern's wooden base, one I didn't notice before. With eager hands, I picked it up. The handwriting was the same uneven scrawl Arya had used, but almost more rushed. It read, "She fears the apology she never gave." My stomach was in a freefall. The apology she never gave. I knew exactly what that meant the moment I read it. There was something I regretted for years, something no one here had ever heard of, something I didn't even speak of. So how could it appear on a scrap of paper in this trailer in front of a bunch of moths? My hand clenched the note. I leaned in closer to the moths, as if looking for a reason why she thought they were so special. Another part of me wanted to rip that lantern open and spread those moths outside, let them loose. But that would be awful. I was just letting some bugs and paranoia get to me. I put the note back where I found it, and I left the room. The rest of the night was a typical babysitting night. The kids stayed asleep, Trina came home, and I left. Maybe it's not the creepiest story, but it is one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. Do you think they were just vague, imaginative notes written by a little girl? Or were they too coincidental? After all, she said they spoke of me, and then she told me things she shouldn't know. Good Lord, I sound crazy. But now you know why moths will always freak me out. The figure at the end of the driveway. From Manic at the Cisco. Fortunately or unfortunately, I had the pleasure of suddenly becoming my quiet neighborhood's go-to babysitter. One moment I'm like, "Mom, I could use a little extra cash." And the next, she was volunteering me to every neighbor that I was open to babysit wherever and whenever. So I was suddenly getting calls every weekend when someone's friend of a friend needs a last-minute sitter to go catch a movie or have a dinner. That's how I ended up babysitting for this elderly couple one autumn evening. They weren't the parents of Lucas and Beth, the kids I'd be watching over. They were their grandparents. Years ago, apparently, a tragedy took Lucas and Beth's mother and father, leaving the grandparents to step in and raise them. They did their best to create a stable home. It was a modest single-story house on a quiet street, a neat yard, and a structured routine for the kids. As I said, I was called in as a babysitter through a friend's recommendation. Lucas was 11, and Beth was 7, and they were good kids. The grandparents had their reasons for keeping life calm and predictable. I mean, they had to step back into parenthood a second time under painful circumstances, something I wouldn't wish on anyone. The night I babysat them was early in fall. I remember it clearly because the leaves on the lawn started to curl at the edges. The grandparents were in their car when I showed up, ready to go almost instantly, with the kids playing in the yard. I chatted with them at the car for a few seconds, they said their goodbyes, and I went in with the kids. They let me know that they had Beth in bed by around 8 or 8:30, and Lucas could have an extra half hour to an hour if he stayed good. Inside, I locked up the door, double-checked it, and we settled in, watching some TV. But the kids apparently weren't too interested, each going to do their own different thing, playing with boys or tearing pages out of coloring books or whatever. On schedule, as the grandparents had said, Beth got sleepy right before 8. I helped her brush her teeth and read a short story before tucking her in. Lucas, who I did judge to be very good that evening, got to stay awake in the living room. We sat on a couch together. Around 9, Lucas yawned and mentioned that sometimes Grandma and Grandpa take him out onto the porch before bed, just to get some fresh air. I wasn't sure if this was a trick to try to get me to stay up longer with them, or if it was true, but I agreed to anyway. It was a nice quiet neighborhood, well lit too. No harm in stepping onto the porch for just a moment. At some point, Lucas pointed and whispered, "Look down there." He pointed toward the gate at the end of the driveway. I followed his finger, and I spotted what appeared to be a figure standing right outside the gate. A person, or at least a silhouette that looked like one. They were perfectly still and looking in our direction. Obviously, that's kind of strange, but people do walk around at night. But what you don't do is stare through the gate, motionless, at people in the dark. "Hello?" I called out softly to them. They didn't budge or make a sound. Lucas grabbed onto me suddenly. "I want to go back inside," he whispered. We went back in and locked the door behind us. It was a relief to come back in, but Lucas looked worried. Trying to sound calm, I said, "Probably just someone waiting for a ride. Maybe a neighbor catching their breath. Some folks are just awkward like that. You know, staring at other people. Nothing to worry about." I wasn't sure if he heard me. He was standing at the curtains, looking in and out and searching around repeatedly. This went on for a couple of minutes. Eventually I asked him, "You seem especially spooked. Are you okay?" He folded his arms and looked at me. "I've never seen it before. Some of the kids around school here talk about this figure that shows up at certain driveways at night. They say if you look at it too long, strange things happen. Lights will flicker and gates open on their own." I couldn't help but smile. "Oh my gosh, you guys have your own local urban legend?" "What's an urban legend?" I told him what it meant, and he said he knew what a legend was, but he didn't get the urban part. I asked him for more info on this legend. "A girl a few streets away claimed she saw it 3 nights in a row. Each night it was closer to her house too. On the 3rd night, something from their backyard ended up placed neatly on their porch step. Her parents added more locks to the house after. She stopped seeing it, but she's different now. Gets nervous around windows after dark." It was a funny story to me. Not sure if I believed it myself. In fact, now I had reason to believe that the figure we saw at the end of the driveway was maybe an older kid who wanted to prank the kids using the legend if he saw them from the road at night. But to be cautious, we closed the curtains and stayed nice and cozy inside. Several more minutes passed. I peered out the window myself just to be sure. In one of the small side rooms, I parted a curtain slightly where I could see the road. I nearly jumped when I saw that the figure was still out there, still not moving. It had been several minutes, quite a while for some kid and their prank after dark. That was a bit of a tipping point, and I was extremely creeped out. I began to wonder if I should call the police about some weirdo snooping around outside. That's when the porch light flickered briefly. My mind immediately went to Lucas's story about flickering lights. I instantly closed the curtain and went back to Lucas. I said it before I thought about it. I shouldn't have been telling Lucas this, but I said, "He's still out there." I looked at Lucas, and he looked terrified. "I knew it. I saw the bulb flicker too. That means he's getting closer." I closed my eyes and shook my head at him, explaining that no one was coming closer and that we were fine. Besides, no one was getting in because the doors were locked. Another half hour dragged by, both of us making half-hearted attempts at small talk to relieve the tension. It was about time for him to go to bed, but I didn't want to put him to bed, because that meant I would be alone. Yeah, I know, not a very adult thing of me to do. Eventually, I tried a different window. I peered out, super scared that they would still be there. I saw the sidewalk where they'd been, and the figure was gone. I felt so relieved. But then I scanned the yard briefly and caught the shape of a figure behind a small tree, much, much closer to the house. I nearly screamed. I bumped a table, rattling some magazines, and Lucas called. "You okay?" "It's closer," I managed to say. Another thing I probably shouldn't have said. Lucas gasped. "That matches the story, but it's all happening at once instead of over several nights." Before I could say anything, I heard a faint thump on the porch. I quickly turned off the TV and strained my ears. There were no footsteps. It was just that single noise, as if something had been moved or someone took a single step. I got my phone out and texted their grandparents, letting them know that there was someone outside and that I was very worried, but also that the kids were fine. We waited. A few minutes went by. Eventually, Lucas whispered, "Are you sure no one can get in?" "Yes," I told him. That was something I believed. Instead of more noises, what happened next were the headlights. Someone was driving into the driveway. I let out a long breath. The grandparents were back, and I could tell Lucas felt much better immediately. We listened as a car door shut and familiar voices murmured. I ran to the front door to let them in. Lucas's grandma looked at me. She looked extremely worried. "Is everyone okay? We got your text." "Yes, everyone's fine. We saw someone outside. They were at the end of the driveway first, but began to come up closer to the house, just staring at us." The grandfather shook his head. "Some darned kid playing a prank. Did they do anything else? Did they try to hurt anybody?" I pointed toward the porch. "We heard something out there, just right there." The three of us went over to investigate. One of their small lawn ornaments, a ceramic turtle normally by the shrubs apparently, was now neatly on the top step, and yet none of us had moved it. Lucas's grandmother looked frustrated. "None of you did this?" Lucas popped out of the house, having heard the question, and shook his head, and he explained that that was probably the noise we heard. I feared I was about to get in trouble for Lucas still being up, but they ignored that, thanks to the situation at hand. His grandfather scratched his chin. "Gonna talk to the neighbors tomorrow. Gonna figure out whose kid is messing around. Don't want anybody on my property acting like that." I bid them good night, smiled at Lucas and let him know that everything was going to be okay now. I had to drive home alone in the dark, so that was creepy, especially after encountering something like that. But luckily, that was the end of it. So far, nothing to update. No more sightings of the figure at the end of the driveway legend, whatever it is. But I pray to God it was just some kid being creepy. Even if it was a person, though, that's some eerie behavior. And if it was my kid going around doing that, they'd be getting some spankings. Thanks for tuning in to Tales from the Break Room, the home of the scariest true work stories. If you want to hear your story narrated by me, send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. We pay 5 cents per word for accepted stories. Help us grow by leaving Tales from the Break Room a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Check out eeriecast.com or search for EerieCast on those very same podcast apps to see our other exciting and terrifying podcasts, like Unexplained Encounters, the other show I host, where I read stories with a focus on the supernatural. To get some merch, go to eeriecast.store. and to unlock ad-free episodes of your favorite EerieCast shows and exclusive audiobooks. Go to eriecast.com/plus and consider signing up for EerieCast Plus. You can follow me on Twitter, I guess it's X now, @DarkPrevails. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube, where I deliver the same content. Just look for Darkness Prevails. Good night. I hope we can share another break sometime soon.